That spark of innovation, it's just waiting for the perfect combination of tools and talent to bring it to life. Welcome to Pitch, Build, Scale. I'm your host, Chris Fanchi, a recovering startup founder, veteran SaaS marketer, turned dev tech enthusiast and growth specialist. Each episode, we connect with the builders, the visionaries, and the problem solvers who are redefining what's possible with today's technology and pioneering the websites, apps, and software products of tomorrow. These are the conversations that transform how we build, how we sell, and how we scale technology businesses in a world where the tech evolves by the minute. Ready to stay ahead of the curve? This is Pitch, Build, Scale. Hello and welcome to Pitch, Build, Scale. Today, our guest is Michael Brown, the visionary founder of CloudNine AI, a company that is pioneering the use of augmented intelligence solutions for enterprise knowledge management, governance, risk, and compliance. With over 25 years of experience in tech, Michael has been at the forefront of leveraging cutting-edge data science approaches to unify data silos, automate compliance, and enable predictive learning. Today, we'll explore the real-world challenges and opportunities of launching and scaling an AI-driven business, securing funding, and executing pilot programs that prove the value of emerging technologies. Michael, welcome to the show.
Chris, thanks for having me. It's certainly a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. So, to get started, let's start out with your journey. What inspired you to get into AI, and what key lessons have you learned along the way?
Well, definitely started in Silicon Valley. I started my career 25 years ago in Silicon Valley. We were working on database applications, before blockchain was blockchain, distributed ledger technology. And when the deployment of the ACA, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was deployed, we were taking a look at, pretty serious applications that would solve some major enterprise problems. And then I got into AI around 2017, strictly machine learning stuff around 2017, 2018.
Okay. So you use the term augmented intelligence, which is obviously not the common terminology. Most people go by artificial intelligence for AI, right? So can you explain a little bit what you mean by augmented intelligence and how that differs from artificial intelligence?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, back in 2017, 2018, we're in artificial intelligence and using machine learning for handling essentially financial information, right? Excel spreadsheet, financial documents, financial numbers. And then augmented intelligence is actually a subsection of artificial intelligence. Instead of replacing humans, we're actually augmenting human intelligence to help humans perform better. And so it's a human in the loop process. So humans don't have to be technical, and humans are actually driving the feature set and innovation. Right.
So how has that played a role in your company, Cloud9 AI?
So the reception has been fairly good because enterprises are looking for new innovations to bring into their organization. As I mentioned, my background started in healthcare, and many of the problems that they have that they're trying to solve within these enterprises is data security. So any type of data sovereignty requirements. So each state has their own state requirements for data sovereignty. And then now you have also federal requirements for data sovereignty. And so what we've been able to do with our tool is to basically create what we call a knowledge source, all the data that these organizations have been collecting for the last 50 years. So our approach is at data stores, data warehouses, or databases, right? They've been around for the last 50 years. And so you think over the last 50 years, you've had companies or you've had, thousands of SaaS applications that have spawned off of these database models or relational databases. And what they've done is they created specific operating systems that operate in silos. And so over the span of 50 years, an organization has collected petabytes of data. And the problem is that it's not usable, right? It's not usable. You have a lot of data that's being used, in production, but then you have a lot of data that's not even accessible that these companies have been collecting. And so we're trying to get some of that data that's unaccessible analyzed.
Okay. So where did the idea for the company come from? And what inspired you to leave the corporate world and start your own business?
Well, so in the corporate world, I had an opportunity where I was a director of a couple of companies that had gone public, and so I experienced an exit after my 2-year cliff, and I thought that opportunity was really, it's really a fantastic feeling, to be part of just being a small part of an organization, going through that exit process and actually seeing something fulfilled. And then when I came across, AI, artificial intelligence, I saw it as another opportunity to address in healthcare because they've been trying to solve the same problem. In healthcare, we've been trying to use blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology, any innovation tool to solve these problems. And so when something new comes along, that's like the first space you want to try it out in because it's so highly regulated. And if you solve a problem there, then it's easy to expand into other areas with other organizations. And so that's what we thought. Just saw a big opportunity, a big hole that needed to be filled, and everyone's been trying to solve the same problem for years.
So, how are you managing the regulatory hurdles? That's obviously a challenging thing for any company to deal with, but especially a startup when you've got limited resources. You don't have a whole crew of lawyers that you can throw at it. You've got to try to figure it out on your own. How have you done that?
Yeah, that's always very difficult to do, and I don't have a simple way to address it except that you always have to consider regulations. I mean, it's really the first step because if you design something and build something without considering the regulatory framework or the regulatory environment, then you're at a loss. And so anytime if you're going to work with enterprises, regulations has to be at the very front because that's the top of the conversation with every executive. As soon as you get into the C-suite or anyone higher in an organization, the first thing they want to know is regulatory framework, right? You're always going to have legal involved, and so regulations is the first step, and so that's the first problem you have to solve.
Yeah, definitely. Where do you see regulations moving in terms of AI? Because obviously, a lot of these technologies are advancing rapidly and way faster than the government and the legal system is keeping up with. Where do you see it going?
Well, in terms of regulations, they're continuously going to be changing. I mean, governments are always going to be changing them, and it's happening right now. And tech is having a hard time keeping up because if you take a look at some of the European requirements versus the requirements that you have in America, they're different. Not only every state is different, but in Europe, they have entirely different regulatory requirements. And then you have to combine healthcare, HIPAA requirements. You might have HIPAA requirements if you are dealing with any type of data privacy, which is very common. You're with enterprises, you're handling sensitive information. So you're going to be using AI to try to solve those problems. And how you do it, it's a lot of customization, it's a lot of work. It's kind of hacking through things. And sometimes you're building something that's specific to an industry. Maybe it's healthcare or HIPAA. In the other case, you might have something in banking. In banking, it might be your privacy related to know your customer or anti-money laundering. And so you're going to have to follow it. I mean, you just have to basically take whatever regulatory requirements the government is giving you, turn that into code, right? That's the hardest thing to do. And if you can do that, you can take whatever legal requirements and turn it into code and make sure that the software automatically follows it, then that's a huge step in any industry.
And so you have a lot of experience and background dealing with compliance and regulation in your past, or is that something that you have on your team?
Both. So my past, as I mentioned, is healthcare, and it's healthcare specific. And I say that because it's impossible for me to know all the regulatory requirements related to banking, AML, and KYC. So even though my background is in healthcare, I still have healthcare experts or subject matter experts because you're dealing with so many different areas of healthcare. You're dealing with the treatment of a patient, treatment of data, but then you're also talking about prevention. You have the treatment and the workflow of care, but in healthcare, you want to, they're also working towards prevention. And so whenever you try to incorporate data, that is part of the prevention, then it's an entirely different dynamic. So we have specialists in those areas in deep. And then for banking, it's a different set of specialists. Like those are, everyone has at least 25 to 30 years of experience because of the enterprises. You're dealing with Fortune 25 companies. And if you're a startup and you want to work with those type of organizations, you've got to take compliance and regulatory frameworks really serious. So yeah, so people internally and also externally, we have multiple folks that are experts in that area. But we're also trying to recruit additional people as well, in different areas that are outside of banking and some areas that we have that are basically data privacy experts. Finance people have backgrounds in things like anti-money laundering, financial crimes, government sanctions. And so when you're dealing with in those type of environments, like in healthcare, we have to report to HIPAA and Medicaid, right? For privacy.
Yeah.
And banking for AML and KYC, you have to report to like the SEC and US Department of Treasury, FinCEN, financial crimes. So whatever regulations that they have, we have to follow it. And we have to have the staff that understands all those different dynamics of it. And then we have to be able to translate that to other people. So we have different levels of people at different areas that have to have that expertise. And so I just bring together the business side of it, organize things.
Okay. Yeah. That seems like a pretty big burden to have to carry as a startup to have that amount of personnel that with that kind of background.
Well, yes. And I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but whenever you're speaking with enterprises, that's important to them. If I were going to start everything out from scratch, would I take on that entire burden? Maybe not. Maybe not. But based upon who we have and the audience that we were targeting, we just felt like, there's such a huge opportunity there. If you land it, it's ginormous. If you don't, that's the problem, right? So I don't know if I'd recommend it to everyone to actually go down that path because you're right. It's a huge burden and you have to have the expertise and prove it.
So how has that impacted your ability to fundraise for the company? That obviously there's that added burden of the personnel that you have to have on board, the regulatory experience and knowledge that you have to have. But you're also an AI company. In AI, there's a lot of costs with compute and storing data, managing data. So how has that impacted your ability to fundraise?
Well, in terms of the access to AI tools, anyone have I mean, it's more accessible than ever right now. It's more accessible than ever. In terms of enterprises, yes, they have better access to it. What we're able to do is we're going at it from a standpoint where we're requiring less compute. Augmented intelligence is not actually um, acquiring more chips, right, and more people. It's actually augmenting the existing CapEx investments that we have or that our companies have. And so we want to use those existing energy sources to actually build the models and customize them for those organizations. And so in terms of recruiting people, that has helped us, a great deal because we're essentially presenting a different data science, a different approach to handling information for some of these organizations. It's been a challenge with fundraising. I'm not gonna lie, it's fundraising is hard, especially if you're not good at it. Some people are really, really good at fundraising. And so, you gotta have an experienced staff. You have to have, your background is questioned. How are you gonna recruit? How are you gonna approach this marketplace? How much experience do they have? So all of those things are taken into consideration, of course.
Yeah. And that personnel you talk about, that's while it is a burden, it's also an asset, right? Because when you're talking to these VCs or anyone that's looking to fund your investors, looking to fund your business, you can showcase that we've got all of this in place. When we go to enterprise potential clients and prospects, we have all this background. We're not having to figure that out as we go.
Right. You have to have it from an investor. Exactly right. From an investor side and also from speaking with enterprises. From the investor side, you need it, especially if you're not strong from raising money. right? If you're not strong at raising capital and you don't have the strong network to be able to raise it, then then you'll need a really strong technical team, right? To show that you're able to pull this off because investors want to know if I'm giving you this check, do you have the team that's going to be able to pull this off? Right. And it's a risk that you have to assess that risk. And so, yeah, it was something that we had to really strongly consider before we were actually going into that VC route, and that path is not for everyone. We said, okay, if this is the path we're going to choose, we know we have to be really, really strong, right? Even more like the tech has to be strong, the idea has to be strong, the team has to be strong. And so if there's any weak point in that, then it's always going to be a challenge.
Are you seeing any AI investment fatigue out there with as many companies that are trying to attack it right now, and the economy is in a questionable condition right now? Obviously, the money's drying up a little bit, right?
Yes, I would say that without question. Raising money, you're doing it all the time. So even before the election, the market was tough. Even now, it's tough. Investment fatigue, yes, definitely. The other thing that you have, though, is that there's also an additional opportunity because there's more investors coming into the market. That's what I've noticed over the course of time. I've noticed more investors moving into early stage investments. I've also seen investors kind of moving more downstream, right? Um, some investors that would typically only invest at Series A are now trying to analyze a move down towards their seed round or even earlier because I get that. I can sense that based upon the questions that they're asking. Some of the questions that these investors are asking that are typically Series A investors are asking them more now at the seed stage. And so, yes, that's becoming tougher because you have to be able to answer everything correctly. So, yeah, it's tough. There's definitely fatigue. It's a long process. Um, it's all of those bad things you've heard. Yeah, it's a long process. It's tough, right?
Would you say that the movement downstream by those investors is due to wanting to get in early on some of these businesses, or is it that they feel more comfortable with the state of the technology and they feel like it's easier now, at least, than it was a couple years ago, to evaluate an AI oriented business in the early stage?
Think it's a combination of both of those things. One, obviously, they want to get into this deals a little bit earlier, but I think what they're figuring out is that with AI now, startups can actually do more with less, right? You're actually able to achieve a little. I think if you get the right investor that understands, okay, we're strategically moving to smaller companies because they can do more with less now. They need fewer engineers to actually get to this stage. And I also think that you see more opportunities for solo entrepreneurs. I think in the past, VCs, well, in the institutional side, they were frowning on solo entrepreneurs, or somebody that didn't have a good co-founding team. And I think you'll find more people solo getting more success and gaining funding as a part of that. I think that's going to come up a little bit more, just because some companies are able to generate traction at a faster level, right? And some investors believe that their investment upside is greatest at this level. They think it's greatest at that pre-seed or seed level. And I've heard that. I've never said, hey, we're actively participating in this area because that's where we can maximize our money. And if a company's got traction, they got that MVP, and all they need is a little capital to get additional clients, then that's what I'm seeing as well. So it's open.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, AI is making so many companies and so many individuals so much more efficient that you hear people semi-jokingly say that we're not far off from seeing our first solo founder become a billion-dollar company, become a unicorn.
It's crazy. It's going to happen. I mean, it's definitely going to happen, and and I think investors they know it and they're searching for it, right? They're searching for it, and so it's inevitable that it will. The other part with AI is that you're um, you're getting more people that are non-technical that are able to
Mhm.
take advantage of the tools, right? So that will bring on an entirely different perspective. And also, companies like DeepSeek, they've changed the narrative. Whether you believe it or not, or whether it's true, they've changed the narrative, right? And so,
Yeah.
well, we've seen more investors open to taking a look at more opportunities. So I think it's a good time. I mean, if you've got a good idea and you want to start a company, like I said, raising the institutional route is not for everyone, but you still have an opportunity. If you want to learn AI and build a business out of it, you still can.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure a lot of investors look at this and they start to think that there might not be later rounds because of what companies are able to do with such a small investment, the efficiency that is available. They may be able to reach their growth goals without having to bring on more investment. So if you don't get in that pre-seed, seed, or Series A, there might not be another opportunity.
You bring up an excellent point. I've actually heard that from other investors. That's why they're moving downstream. They said these businesses need less capital. And an investor that used to cut a $5 million minimum check might do $1 million minimum check, right? And do five businesses instead. So it just depends, or you have so many other people raising funds. There's so many people raising $50 million or $20 million funds and just starting, cutting checks to companies. There's a lot of companies that are doing that as well. You have, more VCs or institutional family offices, super angels. You have more and more of them that are coming out and they want to stay private, but they want to search out, really good deals.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's pivot a little bit from the talk about investment, but this is definitely, I would say, related. You're getting your foot in the door with enterprises, and in some way that's almost an investment in itself, because for an enterprise to take on a startup, to work with a startup, is definitely putting themselves out there. They're almost investing in your success in a way as well. So tell me a little bit about how you got your foot in the door with some of these and how you're making these pilot programs that you've talked about work.
Yeah, it's definitely it's an investment for these organizations and it's also a risk. They've got to take a look at their innovation. So some of these organizations have innovation labs, and some of them realize that they're not able to identify proper innovations and bring them into the company properly. And so some organizations, when you have multiple stakeholders across that company, everyone's working and trying to evaluate the proper technology. And so these organizations will either start what they've called an innovation lab to bring in, a pilot program that will give you some funding. They might not take any equity, but we typically look at pilot programs that are, they want to cut you at least 100,000 and lead into they'll either tell you they'll invest $100,000 and it'll lead into a $500,000 paid pilot, right? Which is kind of what they budget for. And so you're just trying to look at a lot of organizations that have pilots in those fields. We also join a lot of labs, like there's a lot of AI labs that are out there that we've become a part of. And then those corporations come to those labs and tell us what they're looking for. Some of it's good, some of it's, a little bit of a reach, but that's how we, just communicate with them, tell them what we're building, tell them that we're a seed stage startup or early stage startup. This is how we're either raising capital or we need capital in the form of revenue, right? I have to be very straight with them and tell them that. So, and it came up with one of our companies that had an innovation lab, and they told us that, our process is a really long process. It might take, and they told us it might take you 2 years. It was a publicly traded company. I said, 2 years.
Goodness.
Think about this. And so the company's Allstate. I mean, the director was at our lab, and he was speaking to all the startups that was there. And I said, okay, so let me understand this. It's a 2 year process. So what you're saying is that we need at least a 2 year runway to actually pitch you. I said, I mean, that is just not even realistic. There's no one in the room that has a 2-year run rate. So those are some of the things that I learned in speaking with some of these companies. And some said, hey, we want to move fast. We're trying to move fast, but some of them move really slow. And so you just have to find what's going to be a good fit and see how it works out and try to sort out the details with them. So that's kind of the dance.
Yeah, the reality is, at the rate that the technology is advancing and changing, in 2 years, it's your solution could look completely different to
Goalposts
whatever their
change.
problem is.
Right. With enterprise, the goalpost changes so much, and it's hard to just get them to say, okay, let's get into this one group, one department, and come to an agreement, a consensus of what we want to achieve, what we want to deploy, and what we see success. So ironing those things out, it's not easy. But yeah, it's one of the things we have to go through. It's a challenge.
How many enterprises are you encountering that are trying to do these things internally versus outsourcing with companies like your own?
What you mean internally? You mean have an innovation lab or creating?
Building AI solutions, building some of the things that you would kinds of things that you might offer.
A lot of them try. A lot of them try, and they're still doing it right now. There's so many things that are happening. They're trying to do both. They're trying to build it themselves or get somebody else to build it or to buy it. Right? There's that choice. You can build it yourself or you can go outside. And there's always a combination of both. Some companies, if you send things outside, it's taking longer. You're losing control. You're giving away your data, your most sensitive information. So everyone's trying to figure out. So there's two buckets, right? Right now, you have some companies that are just trying to solve the problem, just trying to fix the problem, right? I just need to. We have a problem every day. I got to address it. Some companies have a bigger view and they say, okay, we have so many stakeholders across this organization. All they're doing is spending their time reacting to this problem. We need to figure out a widespread solution that's going to stop from everyone trying to fix these problems. So there's a couple of things, a couple of battles that are going on. It's been continuous. It's been going on for 20, 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of the nature of the beast.
Right, right.
So, where do you see things heading with AI? You're in it on the daily basis. Like, you've been in it for 25 years, so you've seen the technology gradually progressing, and then recently, at least from an outsider's perspective, things seem to be speeding up very, very quickly. Where do you see it in the next few years?
Well, right now we have quite a few problems that we have to solve first, right? One is the amount of compute that's required. We also have some problems with hallucinations that have to be resolved. And so, if you can address a couple of those problems, then that will accelerate AI adoption at a greater level, right? Compute, bias, hallucinations, removing those things, then we'll see a faster acceleration. What we'd like to do is move from enterprises and bring the same solution to people at home, right? Bring it to individuals so these tools can actually be accessible and usable for everyone else in their own house. That's what we see. The ultimate goal is to actually bring these resources to people that don't actually have the resources. You're not able to call up NVIDIA and order 5,000 chips. You don't have the energy where you're at to be able to operate. You have the energy that you have and you have these sources that you have, right? So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things to figure out because they're trying to figure out how long these GPUs will last. If you get an NVIDIA chip, how long does it actually last? Is it 3 years? Is it
Yeah.
5 years? Right? And the software stack that's on top of it, does it really accelerate the lifespan of it? And the other part with AI that you have to realize is that we're only scraping the publicly available data. Publicly available data and professionally published data. Okay. There's all the data that's
Mhm.
behind the firewall. And so once enterprises and organizations give us access to all that information and data behind the firewall, AI will excel, will accelerate. And then we have to also, solve problems like alignment. That's why we're practicing augmented intelligence because we want to make sure that we're in line with humans.
Yeah, the data access issue is definitely a big one, and it seems to be a greater issue here in the States. And some would argue that it's part of the reason that China has been able to either keep up or catch up, whatever you want to call it, because the state basically owns all of the data of all the companies in the state. They have access to everything,
Hmm.
so they've got better training data, or at least more training data than the U.S. has to work with.
Right. That's a good point. That's a good point. A lot of people are bringing that up. It's like, how smart are these models? If we're only using publicly available data, our models are becoming as smart. So you're right. You've got to get real time data, which it'll be interesting to see who has access to it.
Yeah, and let's just say the quality of the publicly available data is not always the highest. If you're scraping
It's not
social media and you're scraping all these other sources, that it you
right.
you get a lot of garbage in, garbage out.
Right. You're using Reddit data, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't work. What's interesting is that so
Yeah.
Grok, they're using they have access to the data from Twitter. So it'll be interesting to see how well that Grok model does because they're actually using real live data. Whether or not you agree with the data that's on Twitter or X, but it's human interaction, right? Live human interaction. You can't get anything on Facebook like that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And that, of course, leads to the regulatory and ethical questions even, is like what kind of biases do need to be built in or should be built in? Should the government have any say over what's being built into a model like this? Or should there it be kind of a free speech, just anything goes landscape?
Yeah, the problem with government, do they really have the expertise to regulate the industry? Right? I think you'll find what will probably happen is that you won't be able to build an AI company that just scrapes data. I think that's probably the first regulation that'll come out is that you can't scrape data. And then you have to make sure that copywritten material is owned. You have to be able to identify who the ownership is, have the lineage for it, and you're not stealing any of that public information. So those things will probably stop in copyright, with copywritten being the first. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and all those points you bring up, we're just going to continuously evolve. Both countries. I don't think we can regulate ours because China's moving so quick. Everyone's moving so quick, right? So it's out of the box. It's out of the box.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things where you almost need, if not something governmental, but some kind of a alliance among businesses where there's an agreement. We're gonna put in the best data we can, put some kind of minor guardrails around proprietary information, but it becomes a national security issue. I know, to use the cliche,
You're
but it
exactly
really
right.
is.
You're exactly right. We should have all the resources available to us to make sure that we're advancing as quick as we possibly can. Should there be a board of AI people? Probably, whether they're state or whether it's something like the board with the World Economic Forum. I'm not saying that's a good board or a World Health Organization, but you need something that's a global organization you know, that will actually oversee what's happening, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, talking about China, obviously they have access to all of their internal, but we also know that they're not shy about taking IP that belongs to other countries as well.
It,
So that's just another leg up that they get in the data race.
it, it's part of their business. It's just part of how they've operated for 50. It's just not going to stop. You're exactly right. So that's just not going to stop ever.
Yeah, it's interesting times that we live in for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, it's exciting though too. I mean, it's actually a fun time. We're actually seeing things evolve relatively quick. More people are getting involved with AI and advanced technologies more so than ever. More so than even I started, and I've seen leaps and bounds since I've got into the industry. So it's been great because people want to know. They want to know how to use it, how to apply it, and even how to invest, which is great.
So, final question, what excites you most about the future of AI, about where we're heading right now?
Putting it well, so I think what would be interesting is that not so in healthcare, so I'm always biased with healthcare. It's not just the treatment of some of these diagnoses, but also the prevention of. I think that once we can figure out, are there any things that prevent us from not just cancer, but from um, dehydration, Crohn's, right? Are there any external conditions that will impact us internally? Or if I'm drinking too much coffee, does it give me too much anxiety? I believe that if we can develop devices that are tracking our biometric information and then giving that information back to us, then having these models work for us, or work for me, right? Work as my own personal assistant when I'm asleep, going through information that's interested in what I'm searching for. As a startup, these are the things that we're interested in. I want to find VCs and investors that are looking for our type of investment vehicle. Great. I want tools that are working for us. So that's where I see it. I see AI being more personalized, and being more accessible, and not just the people that are technical, but people that are not technical. That's how we view it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, where can our listeners connect with you and follow your work?
Oh, Michael Brown. I'm at CloudNine AI. So if I can help any of the listeners, they're going down the VC route. If they want to talk to any of our institutional investors or get any feedback, they can go to the website and email us directly, and I'd be able to help them.
Fantastic. Michael, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing your expertise on all of this, building an AI startup, securing funding, implementing AI solutions in enterprise environments, all of that. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Chris, I really enjoyed the conversation. The hour went by so quick. So thanks.
And to our listeners, if today's discussion sparked ideas for your business, please be sure to subscribe to Pitch Build Scale for more expert conversations with tech leaders pushing the boundaries of innovation. Until next time, everyone, take care.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pitch Build Scale. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast provider so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.